Okay, it's going to be a slightly different presentation because I'm going to put a lot of slides up and there's a lot of content on them. I'm going to try and skip through some of that content so as not to bore you to tears. Much of it you will heard before or seen before. You may not have seen it put together before. So I will try to do that as efficiently as I can. There is a copy of the PowerPoint which has been run off for everybody, so you can have that to take away with. They don't want you reading it while I'm talking, which is very nice of them. So let me start by saying that this actually, Kevin Lynch is such an important figure. I feel, I don't really feel I'm worthy of a Kevin Lynch memorial lecture, but it's great to be here and to be able to deliver this. And I wanted to take from Kevin Lynch, from his theory of good city form, an emphasis on social justice. He doesn't spend a lot of time talking about it. He says it's going to be very difficult to achieve, but he thinks that through sustainable development we might get somewhere towards solving it for future generations. But that's the theme I wanted to pick up on. And I also wanted to pick up on something Sebastian Lowe wrote in the journal in the summer when he said, urban designers are not at the core of the debate on important national issues like housing shortage, green belt, and garden cities. I don't think I need to correct that now that David Rudlin and co have done their work for the Garden Cities project, but I wanted to emphasize that I agreed totally with that, and I wanted to be a bit of a corrective, if you like. So, without further ado, what am I going to actually talk about? 5 things really: the UK housing crisis and the consequences of undersupply, the coalition's housing planning and localism, very briefly, the Garden City debate and the coalition the concepts versus the Wolfson winner examples, because there are 6 or 7 shortlisted schemes which I want to touch on. I want to have a quick look at the London housing strategy and the harsh realities of that, because I think that's really the only place that there's a lot of housing being built and we can make judgments about it. And then I want to look at some solutions, but that will really be by looking at the key reports which have just come out from people like Lyons and co. So it's quite a lot to do, and I'm going to try to skip lightly through it as best I can. But I start off with this diagram, which I think is very powerful. I first spotted it in the London Review of Books, and it took my breath away, really. And I discovered they got it from a oblique source in Sheffield. Now it's in the KPMG report in glorious Technicolor. And I think the points about it are the end of council housing, what a hole that's left. The modest production of housing associations. We really haven't allowed them to prosper and to grow in the way in which they should have done. And then a private market which goes up and down like a yo-yo, as incredibly sensitive to economic growth and stagnation. The key thing to note about that, of course, is as supply goes down, the prices go up. And they go up to such an extent, of course, that we have a real problem. And of course, also, the population hasn't stopped growing. 8 million people since 1981. Where are they going to be housed? How are they going to be housed? Especially the poorer half of them. So, a brief reconnaissance of the last 40 years of undersupply and government disregard. I'd like to say that I think Labour has been as guilty in some ways as the Conservatives in terms of not giving this issue the priority it needed. But of course the Thatcher government it was who introduced right to buy and Buytolet and began the whole kind of rentier boom, which of course we're living with now. The major government recognised the problem, didn't really do anything much about it, had a quality initiative. The Blair government pursued a renaissance and got brownfield up to 77%, but only slowly increased housing production. They did actually increase it. Brown came in with some ideas about increased social housing support, but of course the financial crisis intervened and other initiatives, eco-cities, the Northern Way, fell by the wayside really. And then, of course, the recession, and then Cameron comes in and his coalition government abolishes the regional spatial strategy, insists upon local plans, which I think is a good thing, a very positive thing, but gives a big boost to private rental, etc. So the affordability crisis increases dramatically. And I think all of this can be put into a single sentence of David Harvey's work, where he says, you know, this is the progression of neoliberalism: deregulation, privatization, withdrawal of the state from social provision, a profoundly democratic set of outcomes. And that's where I think we are at the moment. And then the key statistics that define the crisis. I think we know we need somewhere around about 200 to 243 houses annually. We're building about half that figure, just slightly over it. Home ownership is falling from 71 to 65% since 2003. Private renting is increasing significantly, 31 to 45%, and particularly amongst the 25 to 45-year-olds. So they're being taken out of the potential owner occupancy sector. And that's another very worrying thing. And that statistic there, that on average, people spend 40% of their income on private rent, those in private rent. Those in social rent pay 30%, but those in owner occupation pay 20%. It's that inequity, I think, which is really the very worrying thing, and is having an enormous effect on society at large, and of course on urban design in turn. Average house prices now 8 times the average income rather than 4 times as they were in 1984. And this diagram from the KPMG report, which is a brilliant report, shows this kind of, every time we have a downturn, what happens to housing. It falls, it doesn't recover, it continues to fall. And the key conclusion of that is that house builders now, their response is to prioritize margins over volume. So, you know, they're making good, steady profits, but they're not building anything like enough. That's their strategy. And then, of course, the impact of house prices on land prices. House prices may be 6 times higher than they were in 1983, but land prices are 16 times higher. And in Birmingham, they reckon that land prices are 60 times the agricultural value. In London, outer London, it's 200 times. So that's the kind of barrier that we're facing when we come to try to finance housing. And it's a big problem for house builders, of course. So, you know, they are not immune to this problem. They suffer from this problem very significantly. And that is felt through the problems with the community infrastructure levy, which of course is only applicable in those places which have got plans, but that is no longer only covering 1/3 of the infrastructure costs. So it's becoming less and less significant and falling significantly. And then the increase in private landlords. I was astonished to discover that 72% of private landlords have 1 property. So there's this tremendous end product of the Buytolet boom, which has been really problematic. And of course the Buytolet is so profitable that it outperforms shares by 3 times. It's no wonder that those who can are sorting their money away in that process. And that makes the problem much worse. What are the implications for urban design? Well, I think they're the most significant. Housing is the most significant built form in the urban landscape, and its success in achieving a sense of place is one of the bedrocks of urban design and of social continuity. It's key to neighbourhood and neighbourhood quality. The tenure of housing indicates the level of control that people have, and the amount they have to pay influences their lifestyle directly in terms of their income. The size and adaptability of housing is very significant, and you know, if more and more lower income households are excluded from new development, urban design is going to be complicit in this social exclusion. So all of those things are the things I worry about. And just to break up the kind of the quantity of words, a couple of illustrations. These are 2 things, 2 projects that I visited and take my students to whenever I get the opportunity. And these from 2009, this is the Tabard, this is Barclay Homes. I'm going to be very rude about Barclay later on. But with 37% affordable, 486 dwelling units per hectare, high density, a good social content, a good mix of uses, a kind of gated community, but only for the 6 hours of night. So it's extremely well integrated into the fabric. So a really big plus. We can do it. Barclay Homes can do it when they want to. And of course, the second example, Accordi, Cambridge. Again, this time a very good local authority, a very good house builder, excellent architects, landscape architects, and really going the full mile really to produce something that is 30% affordable with 3 hectares of public gardens, but is also a good density, 47 dwelling units per hectare. So we knew that in 2009 we could produce these sorts of things. It's easy to forget that, because now, of course, it's become much more difficult. If we look at the housing streams, I'm only going to highlight a couple of things here. £4.7 billion for affordable housing stream. This is for affordable rent and affordable ownership. And so it's a large sum of money, but as we see in the buts at the bottom, Treasury grants to housing associations have been cut by 60%, not by 2/3. So, you know, there's a kind of giving and taking away here. Build to rent is very significant, yet to impact, I think, but clearly something that the government has in mind. Purpose-built private rental and big loan guarantees for that. So that's something which is going to hit us, I think, shortly. And then significant money for large site infrastructure projects for something like 200,000 homes, at least a good 1 year's supply perhaps, in terms of breaking the logjam in those projects. All the rest is small beer, really. There's a builders finance fund rescuing stalled projects. There's a bit for custom build. There's a little bit for estate regeneration, some for infrastructure, and new money for housing zones to support brownfield housing, particularly in London. But of course, all of that money, it's bewildering in terms of funding. You can't get hard figures for how the money and where the money is spent. That's very frustrating. And all the time, grants are going. The unused bedroom tax is working at the other end in a punitive fashion, and Help to Buy is working fine for those with good salaries, but maximum of 4.5 to the income. So it's having no major effect, really, upon the market. And then housing and planning. It's interesting that in some ways planning is really not part of the problem in the sense of what the government has done, with one major exception, two major exceptions perhaps. I think the radical compression of policy was probably overdue, but has gone far too far, really. Plan-led it needed more emphasis. It needed to be driven much harder. Still only 50%, 57% of plans adopted. 21% not even published. So that really is important. But if you're going to put the emphasis on plan-led, then abolishing the regional spatial strategies has been a disaster. The duty to cooperate is too weak. We have core planning principles there, but I think they are, it's a little bit of lip service in a sense to those who might take those apart later on. The community infrastructure levy is being tougher and tougher, more tests of viability, reduced monies. Localism, I think, is a distraction. I know Joe will take great exception to that, but I think in the context of housing supply, it's it is exactly that, a distraction. And things like the new homes bonus is the only real incentive to local authority councillors to do something about getting their plan up. But the real sting is in the tail. And that is, I didn't find this, first of all, when I first started to do this analysis. I couldn't find anything really significant about affordable housing in the design compilation. But when I got to find it in the NPPF, I read that inclusive communities were going to be a product of affordable housing up to 80% of market rents. And when you think the social rent is 30%, that is absolutely ludicrous. And it's really, that's something I'm going to come back to in the context of London and examples in London. I said that the design advice has also been condensed, so condensed that the London planners are now intending to rescue the most useful advice. I think that's a very useful thing for them to do and a very necessary thing, because baby in bathwater is the real product of such a condensed set of design advice. Building for life is no longer a key CLG indicator, which lost architecture, sustainability, construction innovation, so any kind of real innovation. And we lost CABE, and I think the loss of CABE, or the downsizing of CABE, which is what I'm supposed to say, is really, I think, has been very significant. We don't get the state evaluations, we don't get best practice housing design, although we get the housing design awards, of course. We don't get the good critique of house building products, and we don't have the strategic urban design initiative, which I think was something that was really quite important and should have been something for the future. We've had the Farrell Review, but how can you have a Farrell Review when DCMS is all DCMS and no DCLG? I mean, to his credit, Terry says the role of positive planning is critical, but I think that decision to separate the two, again, is a negative step backwards. And then finally, I was going to take the example of the, I don't have it here, but I was going to take the example of the Rob Cameron's fantastic treatise on the quality reviewer. When I was going through the HGA stuff, I found that they've got that down to 1 page now, a 1-page form, and I thought, what an insult, what a pointless activity, and that really did upset me. So that leads us on to the other final part of what the government's doing, and this is the locally led Garden Cities Initiative, which is actually small beer, I think, really, because really, apparently, Ebbsfleet and 2 others are going to be potential case studies. It's strong on anti-top-down planning, which I think is we still need top-down planning. It trots out the usual material. It includes the TCPA 10 principles, which are very useful, but there's no additional guidance or updating of those. They expect local authorities to come up with the goods, really, on these projects, and then they will offer HCA loans, Atlas expertise, and things like that to support them. But what really worries me is this question of land value uplift, paying for infrastructure, which is the TCPA's principle number, what is it? Anyway, it's one of the TCPA key principles. But how is that going to be achieved is really such an important question. So I think that from the point of view of the coalition, it's a very retro idea. And the challenge, of course, is to turn it into something which is very much more up-to-date, much more positive. And that's, of course, where the Wolfson Initiative comes in. And I thought reading these documents was one of the best things that I've done in the last year, really. It really invigorated me and made me think again about all these questions. I went back to Peter Hall's book and looked at containment again and all of his wise words about the new towns and all of that kind of thing, the green belts and all those other things, and the whole kind of Howardian tradition which he's evoked so strongly. So that I thought all the documents that I read, the winners, the shortlisted set, were very interesting. And of course, I was delighted that the winner was Rudlin with his idea of 3 suburban extensions, each of 5 neighbourhoods, with as much accessible green space and new development as new development. So very much a balanced game, really, of taking away green space but putting it back in a protective designation, using bus rapid transit, because clearly wasn't viable to use mass transit of a different kind. And that very good statement, land acquired at 20 times agricultural value, 15% of development value. It's the only person I've seen to actually set that down in any way. And of course, it'd be very interesting to know what the logic of that really is. But it's a key statement, I think, and something that other people have really not done. So lots of good things about these, about the winner particularly, but also about the others. I'll come on to the others in a moment. But of course, no sooner had the prize been awarded that the Housing Minister, Brandon Lewis, says, in the most kind of hopeless, really, way possible, we're committed to protect the Greenbelt and against urban sprawl, without really understanding, certainly not understanding the concept of urban sprawl. A very weak, pathetic response from someone, of course, who is a well-known buy-to-let landlord. But that shouldn't surprise anyone. So here's Uxester. Here's the idea of doubling the size of an existing city. It's a kind of expanded town mentality that I think seeps through much of this, much of the Wolfson entries, and I think that's a very positive thing. And the comment about you need good rootstock to grow your city, you know, all that, remember the Newtown blues and all those kinds of things, you know, that's something which will help to short-circuit the process. And I found it briefly talking to David how much he'd learned from the Oxford initiative, which I'll come on to in a moment. Many ideas were derived from the case of Oxford, which has a very similar problem, and in terms of kind of expanding town. So what we have in this example, 600 hectares, half development, half green space. It preserves existing residential amenity to negate, really, the criticisms of NIMBYism and things like that. It's bus rapid transit, I've said. It's got an expanded town centre, stakeholder involvement, a sustainability charter. Seems to me to be a very positive thing. But as I say, the others as well, I think, got some very important points, particularly the runner-up, Shelters project in northwest Kent, which its emphasis on sort of 5 sub-settlements linked by a good rail system, because that's already in existence. Fast build, 38% affordable, the density up to 60 dwelling units per hectare. Again, I think that's something which is useful. Prefabrication ideas, modern methods of construction, that's again something that we should be thinking about much more. And including a mix of rental and ownership and some self-build, etc. Very extensive green space protection, an emphasis on patient money and Garden City Trust. I wondered when they listed the church commissioners as their funders, whether there was any reality to that. I'm still puzzling over that. I'd like to think that there was a certain truth in that, and that could work. And of course, maximising public participation. And the actual model that they show is a very interesting one, very, very Dutch, I think, in its in many of its aspects, particularly perhaps its density, dense core, sub-centres, strong protection of water environment, because this is low-lying land, etc., and an all-round excellent project. So very encouraging, I think, and it's interesting here now it's talked about in the context of extension of Crossrail and things like that. But of course, we're starting to dream.